When did a gut feeling save your life? If you enjoy this video, consider giving it a like and subscribing. Almost 8 months pregnant, normal, complication-free pregnancy. Walking through the grocery store I had a twinge of a headache. Told my husband we needed to go home. At home I took a shower and relaxed a bit, but got an urgent impending doom feeling. Still just a tiny headache, not even enough for a Tylenol. Packed my toddler's diaper bag and requested we go to urgent care. The whole ride there I felt fine, wondering what I was even going to tell them at check-in. But that "you're not okay" feeling was still looming. We pulled in. I carried my sleeping 2-year-old inside and basically said, "I'm pregnant and something is not right." My blood pressure was 256/148. I had a seizure 7 minutes after getting in the room. If I had told my husband to drive past and go to the ER, we would have been stuck in traffic as a truck had rolled over. If I hadn't left the grocery store or my house when I did, there's a chance I wouldn't have made it. We got a ride to the hospital. When I was stable, I was induced at 35 weeks, and my son was born perfectly fine, albeit small. I stayed on blood pressure meds for 8 days before it went back to normal. 3 years ago I was planning a major fundraising event. I was working ridiculous hours trying to make sure everything was going to run smoothly. I had worst case scenarios planned out like a crazy person. One day I was climbing the stairs after getting home rather late when I became unnaturally short of breath. As I sat on my bed my breathing returned to normal. My face became hot with what I can only assume is what's considered a hot flash in older women. I started to tingle with fear. I don't know how to explain it exactly. It was like I could feel electricity in the air warning me something was wrong. I immediately packed my laptop, paperwork, extra clothing, toothbrush, and so on, and I slowly walked down the stairs to my car, driving myself to the ER. As soon as I got through the doors I collapsed, unable to breathe. I don't recall everything that happened right after, but what I do recall was being in the hospital for 8 days because both of my lungs were littered with blood clots. I had gotten a blood clot in my lower left calf from sitting and working too many hours on the event. It broke loose and spread throughout my lungs. The doctor said it looked like my lungs were filled with popcorn. Had I not driven myself to the hospital when I did, the nurse said I would have died. I will never ignore shortness of breath again, and I will trust myself when I know something is wrong. I was a young naive freshman in college and had basically no experience talking to boys. This guy had sat next to me for my whole 2-hour psych lecture and casually talked to me the whole time. Just little comments about the lecture, showing me things on his laptop. Innocent stuff. When lecture ended and we got outside it was pouring. To this day I've seen rain like that maybe twice in my life. Rain that would physically hurt to walk in. He offered me a ride, and I said yes, but as he was pulling the car up I thought to myself don't get in, and took off running to my dorm. Saw him on the news a few months later for raping 2 women. This was a few years back. I came out of a club in my hometown after a heavy night of drinking. I was a student then, and out with a lot of university friends. Friends that I lost during the night. I was alone. I was going to get a taxi home, but thought I could do with some McDonald's first. We have a big 24 hours one in our town. During my drunken walk towards the McDonald's I heard crying coming from one of the dark narrow alleyways we have in our town. I followed the noise down the alleyway until I came across a woman with her face towards the wall. She had a hood covering her face and had no distinguishing features. At first glance I thought that maybe she had been raped or mugged. Like why else would there be a woman crying in an alleyway? Anyway, as I got closer to her in that poorly lit alleyway, I saw 2 giant industrial bins between her and myself. It wasn't until I got within a few feet of the bins that I stopped. It was like a giant shock went through my body. I don't know how to adequately explain it other than a primal instinct. Within 2 seconds of seeing them bins that are large enough for people to hide behind, the dark lighting of the alleyway, and the faceless woman crying I was 50% sure I was prey. I felt an urge to run away. It was like something inhuman in me was telling me to turn and run my legs out of that dark place. When I got to the light at the end of the alleyway I turned to see if anybody was chasing me. Nobody was. But nobody was crying also. When I was in college, I lived in a sketchy part of Chicago. I liked to take late night strolls, even when I was living in that neighborhood as a 20-year-old woman. Yeah, I know. Pretty dumb of me. One night, I was feeling stressed out, so I embarked on one of my late night strolls. I was walking along a somewhat busy road. Cars were zooming past me. Pretty normal. I wasn't paying much attention, because I was too wrapped up in whatever was stressing me out that night. Suddenly, a chill shot up my spine. Hypervigilance washed over me, and I became more alert than I had ever been. Something was wrong. Someone was watching me. I quickly spotted a car. It was driving in the opposite direction, a little slower than usual. It was too dark for me to see anyone inside the car, and the car was pretty unassuming. But I still knew something was off. They were watching me. I just knew. The car drove past me and then made a U-turn. Now it was right behind me, creeping along the curb. Luckily, there was a Walgreens a few blocks ahead. I started walking faster, and the car eventually sped past me and disappeared into a corner. I somehow knew I wasn't safe yet, so I still sprinted to Walgreens. I told the security guard what happened, and we both went outside. The car was parked up the street, about 50 to 100 feet away. The security guard was a big guy who looked intimidating. He marched toward the car, and the car immediately backed up, made a U-turn, and then booked it out of there. The security guard called the cops, and they drove me home. I never took a late night stroll again. My gut made me more alert, but it was really the security guard who saved my life. I'm positive that, if he wasn't there that night, something bad would have happened to me. I wish I could find that security guard to thank him. My husband, me, and our 2 young children were visiting my parents. They live in a rural farming area. There are steep hills, fenced acreages right next to the road. We left late. The kids were asleep. We seatbelted the kids in the backseat of the small car. Driving down one of the steep hills, and around a curve I'd get an anxious feeling, and say out loud, "It's a wonder we have never seen any cows loose out here." Then we start up another steep hill and I say, "Can you imagine if a black cow was out on a night like this?" My husband immediately slows down, and at the bottom of the hill a black cow was standing in the middle of the road in a lane. We were stunned. We slowly drove around the cow and looked for an open gate or downed fence. We didn't see anything. It was surreal. Looking back, I have said it was sixth sense or divine intervention. Bovine intervention? On my very first day as a full-fledged police officer, I was called to assist on a single car accident. It had been raining that day and a car had crashed and turned sideways on a highway off-ramp, forcing the first officer to shut it down. He was afraid that cars were coming by too fast, and he asked me to shut down the closest lane. I parked my car in a lane on what was a perfectly straight stretch of highway. Eventually, fire and EMS arrived to tend to the people who had been in the car, and a tow truck arrived to clear the wreck. There were 5 vehicles with flashing lights on this straight stretch of highway at night. I was also wearing a full-length high-visibility raincoat with reflectors on it. I felt pretty comfortable standing near the center lane, and so I wasn't paying attention to oncoming traffic, but I suddenly got the feeling that I should stand closer to my unit. As soon as I moved, a car barely avoided striking my police car, veered to where I had been standing, crossed over 2 lanes, struck a car, veered in the opposite direction, struck another car, spun out, and then came to a stop after striking a guardrail. I ran down the highway to assist the driver, who had totaled her car and had broken both her legs. She said that she couldn't tell which lane was being blocked off. I'm almost 100% sure that she had been texting and driving. I grew up in a small farming community. Back then, when you were the only kid on the bus who lived down a stretch of road, the bus driver dumped you off on the corner of the street and you usually walked the half-mile or so to your house. I was in detention once, so I had to ride the elementary bus home after, and no young kids lived on my road, so I was dropped off. As I got off the bus, and it started driving away, another guy pulled up to turn right. He just stared at me with dead eyes and my adrenaline simply spiked. We had just plowed the field I was in, so it was fairly rough terrain, but I knew in my heart of hearts that he was coming back. So I sprinted. As I was about halfway through the field, running parallel to the road, I know now I should have run deep, I turned and saw him charging back up towards the road I was just dropped off on. He was moving. Long story short, I hit a cornfield as he slammed on his brakes and got out of his car. By that time I was gone. I heard him get back into his car and drive away, but I didn't move from that field for a good 2 hours. I eventually trudged my way home. If you enjoy these videos, please consider subscribing.